Welcome to another episode of Mr. Burley Teaches, a series of lectures for the AP Environmental Science classroom. Today's lecture is on biogeochemical cycles, the important biogeochemical cycles that provide our planet with life and diversity. We start here with an acronym called CHNOPS, CHNOPS. And that's an acronym that stands for the important biogeochemical cycles that we care about in the environmental and earth sciences. Okay, so let's take a look at this acronym. The C stands for carbon and the carbon cycle, and how carbon cycles in and out of the atmosphere and into the ground and the oceans and into life itself and into the soils. All right, very important cycle on Earth. The H standing for hydrogen, the most important cycle dealing with the water cycle on Earth. The N stands for nitrogen. We're going to talk today about the nitrogen cycle and how nitrogen cycles in and out of the atmosphere and how it's important to have nitrogen present in soils so that plants can absorb it. And then animals and us can take in those nutrients, the nitrogen, into our own bodies. The oxygen cycle. Oxygen cycle in and out of the atmosphere, into rocks, the rust of the iron in rocks, okay, and down into the soil and the pore spaces of soil, in and out of the atmosphere. The P standing for phosphorus, another important nutrient cycle when it pertains to life and soils. And then the S stands for sulfur. Alright, so CHNOPS becomes a nice acronym to remember the biogeochemical cycles that are important in the environmental and earth sciences. And we're going to go through one very, very important one today, the nitrogen cycle. To better understand ecosystems and life on Earth, we need to explore how these nutrient cycles affect plants and organisms. And the nitrogen cycle is so very important because amino acids themselves and the proteins that make up our bodies, literally make up the DNA in our bodies, have the molecule nitrogen built into them. Alright, so if there was no nitrogen cycle, it's easy to say that there might not be life on Earth. It is literally a building block on Earth. Alright, and that's why it's so very important. All life on Earth depends on it. Okay, so let's take a look at the cycle itself. And I'm going to do my best here to walk you through this diagram because I think it gives you a good visual of the processes and the places that nitrogen cycles. Alright, and we're going to start right here in the atmosphere where there's what I'm going to call free nitrogen. Just to remind you, 78% of our atmosphere is nitrogen. But we need that nitrogen to get into plants. For it to be a building block of life itself, it needs to get down into the soils and into plants and animals. What's going to be important here is that this free nitrogen, the N2 molecule, is not what life uses. Alright, we are going to use something called nitrates. Alright, that molecule, the NO3, the nitrate, is the molecule we need so that our bodies and our tissues and our cells can use it. Alright, so let's start here in the atmosphere, and let's say that atmospheric nitrogen deposits onto the soils. Okay, so taking you back to soils, the pore space in the soils. If there's no pore space, atmospheric nitrogen cannot get down into the soils. If there is pore space, it can, and it will get down into the soils and buried. Okay, and when that happens, when nitrogen gets into the soils, something has to happen. Conversion by bacteria. All right, here's a little circle here. If you're looking down through the microscope, you see this bacteria right here. That bacteria is going to fixate nitrogen. Right? It's going to convert nitrogen from free nitrogen and attach an oxygen into nitrites. Thank you, bacteria, for converting or fixating nitrogen into nitrites. But that's still not the type of nitrogen, that's still not the ion that we want. So a second type of bacteria is going to fixate another oxygen onto that molecule and make it into a nitrate. And now that nitrogen is the right type of nitrogen, the right ion, to be absorbed by plants. Okay, and that material, that nutrient, will actually become part of the cell wall, part of the structure, the tissues of the plant. That nitrogen will be in the plant. And then animals will eat those plants. And it'll become part of the tissue and the DNA and the cells of the animal. All right, and once that's in the animal, that nitrogen can come out as waste or as the animal dies and decomposes in the decomposition process, there's decomposition, nitrogen will go back into the soil. Animal waste will go back into the soil. That animal waste is actually in the form of ammonium, all right, NH4, which, as you now know, is not the form of nitrogen we need. So as animal waste and waste products go into the ground as ammonia, we need that bacteria to again fixate, or another term for fixation is nitrification. All right, we need that bacteria to convert that ammonium into nitrites. And then we need a second bacteria to convert it into nitrates so that it can again be absorbed by plants and then again be absorbed by animals. So hopefully you're following along here, because we just went through a whole bunch of processes. First, the deposition, use of pore space by atmospheric nitrogen, and then we needed to fixate that nitrogen and convert it from an unuseful form to a useful form, and then we needed it to get absorbed into plants. All right. A couple other things going on in this image. Another way that atmospheric nitrogen can become fixated is through lightning. A lightning bolt take an atmospheric nitrogen and fixate it, and that nitrogen would get deposited into the soil. All right, so you can build nitrite through lightning. There's about 12,000 lightning strikes every second on planet Earth, so we're talking about a nice amount of nitrogen. Okay, by no means is that sufficient for all the plant's needs on the planet, but it's something. It contributes. All right, and then the last little process on this image is called denitrification. All right, once we have the form of nitrogen we need, those nitrates, and I always remember the ones we need as with the word ate in there, as if the plants ate the nitrate. Okay, that's what they like to eat, nitrates. Not all nitrates that are present in soil are going to be absorbed by plants. Other bacteria, and there they are, they're sitting all the way over here. Other bacteria might take the nitrate, and the process of denitrification is taking off that oxygen molecule and reconverting back to free nitrogen in the pore space of soils, and as it works its way up to the surface, it can be added again to the atmosphere. Okay, so the process of denitrification takes that nitrate, breaks it down, and converts it back into free nitrogen and adds it back into the atmosphere. Okay, so there's a lot of cycling going on here, a lot of key concepts. So let's explore this a little bit further and talk about this and how important the nitrogen cycle is and what problems can come about when we take this for granted. Thinking about soil, we looked at the soil texture and the soil porosity and permeability. We were looking at physical properties. Another property would be the presence of those converting bacteria. We need those bacteria in the soil. You can have very good soils when it comes to texture and permeability and porosity, but the bacteria isn't present. So there's a lot that goes into what it means to be good soil, which is one of the reasons why I gave you the compost project, because you got a chance to see the process and taking natural food wastes and lawn wastes and allowing them to naturally break down so that those nitrogens and that phosphorus can be added again to new soils. So you can see the quality of good soil. We cannot take soil for granted because it is such a natural resource that we need and rely on, and we need to preserve it and treat it as a natural resource and not just dirt. Let's talk a little bit about something called a legume. A legume is a plant. It's a type of plant. And these are very special types of plants because these types of plants have little pouches. Right? And inside these little pouches, or these little sacs, is airspace. And within that airspace are bacteria. And lo and behold, those bacteria contained in the roots of these legumes, those bacteria are the ones that convert nitrogen into nitrates. So this is a type of plant we can call a natural nitrogen factory. These are very special plants because they replenish the soil naturally with nitrogen. These nodules contain the bacteria that we need, that we're looking for to convert nitrogen into nitrates. So a legume, some examples are beans, clovers, alfalfa, lentils. Okay, those are just some of the legumes that are out there. And you'd know a legume because if you pull the plant up and you see these little nodules, you're dealing with a legume. Naturally replenish the soil with nutrients. So taking a look here, you might drive down the street and see the local farmer who has planted corn in year 1, planted corn in year 2, planted corn in year 3, year 4, year 5. Corn is a plant that takes up tremendous amounts of nitrogen, therefore depleting the soil relatively quickly of those essential nutrients, like nitrogen. Okay, it likes well-drained, dried-out soil and high amounts of nitrogen. The problem is when the farmer harvests the corn, he'll cut the entire stalk off and harvest the entire stalk, leaving no plant material to fall on the ground, rot, and replenish the soil with nitrogen. So a farm field that has corn after corn after corn after corn will quickly become depleted of nitrogen. What the farmer should do is take a year off from corn and plant a legume like clover. And you might notice that over the winter time, a farmer might plant winter wheat or clover and allow that legume to replenish naturally the soil with nitrogen. Okay, that's why they plant clover. It might be difficult for a farmer to take a year off from corn, especially when that's his cash crop. If he has a contract to grow corn and he cannot take a year off, cannot naturally replenish the soil, how can he go about replenishing the soil with nitrogen if he cannot use legumes? Okay, the answer is fertilization. Right? He needs to fertilize. And a typical fertilizer, you'll see numbers, 10, 10, 10. Okay, what that refers to is the percentage of the essential nutrients that plants need in the fertilizer, like potassium, phosphorus, and nitrogen. Alright, so something with 10, 10, 10 has equal amounts, potassium, phosphorus, and nitrogen, the rest being filler to apply onto the soil. And fertilizer does some good things. It increases the yield, alright, so you'll get a bigger, better plant. It replenishes those nutrients, which is what we're using it in the first place. And it helps prevent soil erosion because in areas where there might not be good growth, with the use of fertilization, there will be growth and those roots and plants will hold the soil down. So it helps prevent soil erosion. So fertilizing is needed in places where you cannot use legumes or you cannot rotate your crops for whatever reason. Fertilizers come in many shapes and sizes. They come in liquid sprays. They come in granular spreads that you literally spread. You can even use animal manure, and we're using human manure or human waste as fertilizer. Just to reiterate why you did that compost project, I wanted you to think about the carbon and nitrogen ratio because we talked about the carbon cycle in class. We're talking about the nitrogen cycle. I wanted you to see and realize to make good soil, it takes those essential nutrients. And we can do that and have a lot of good come out. You can build your own soils through composting and decrease a reliance on chemical fertilizers. You can build your own soil for your garden. There should be no need to use fertilizers at a small scale. We can also reduce the amount of trash that goes into a landfill. Most of the trash that we produce as a society is food. That food goes to a landfill and it never breaks down. That's the point of a landfill. We'll learn all this. We can take that food waste and instead of filling up our landfills with something that's biodegradable and has essential nutrients in it, we can instead compost it and put it back into the soils and put it back into the environment and even grow our own food with it that's chemical free. Okay, so that's what I wanted you to see when it came to composting. And you're also introduced to composting at the same time. You're introduced to the process. You got introduced to the need and the reason why we should compost. You got introduced to the different models or the variety of containers or the different methods. And when we do waste and recycling unit, we can revisit composting and really dive deep and maybe even build a couple of these for the Seek property. Okay, that's the goal. The goal is to educate the community and provide information that's accessible. Going through all this, Hopefully you're seeing the importance of the nitrogen cycle and nitrogen in the soil. Okay, we need that nitrogen in that soil. We need that bacteria there to convert it into a useful type of nitrogen so that plants can absorb it and we can eat the plants and obtain the nutrients that we need. There's a problem. When there's too much nitrogen or when there's too much phosphorus, we have what's called nutrient pollution. Okay, pollution is anything that's somewhere that it shouldn't be. That's pretty much what the definition of pollution is. You can have noise pollution, where there's too much noise, where there shouldn't be noise. You can have nutrient pollution, where there's nutrients where they shouldn't be. And we're going to see our nations and our world's waterways are the places where those nutrients should not be, but they're finding their way there, and there's negative impacts. Okay, from some of these pictures here, you can already see some of the negative impacts of what happens when there's nutrients in places where they shouldn't be. So let's explore this concept, because this is an environmental science class, and you need to know some of these issues in the world today.